The wind was a blade. It found the tear in Delilah Grace's sleeve and sliced straight to the bone. She ran, stumbling through the knee-deep drifts of the pass, her breath a series of small, white explosions in the twilight. She could not feel her feet, which was both a blessing and a terror. Below her, in the canyon she had been climbing for hours, a dog barked. It was not a wild bark. It was the sharp, disciplined sound of a hound, and it meant they were still coming. "Faster," she whispered to herself, the words stolen by the gale. The men behind her were not soldiers. They were worse. They were bounty men, hired by the man her father intended her to marry, a man who saw her not as a wife, but as a fine, unbroken filly to be added to his collection. Her father, his spine dissolved by whiskey and gambling debts, had shaken the man's hand and called it a bargain. Delilah had called it a death sentence. She had endured the beatings, first from her father when she refused, and then from her fiancé, a man named Absalom Finch, who wanted to show her the cost of defiance before the vows were even spoken. The bruise high on her cheekbone was a throbbing, frozen knot. Her lip was split, but it was the quiet, oily way Finch had looked at her that night, telling her what he would do once the preacher was gone, that had finally given her the strength to bolt. She had taken nothing but the clothes on her back and a stale loaf of bread. The bread was long gone. The night was falling. The pass was closing. She pushed a snow-heavy pine bough out of her way and slipped. Her good boot, the one that still had most of its soul, slid on a patch of ice hidden beneath the powder. She fell hard, gasping as the wind was knocked from her lungs. For a moment, she lay there, tasting blood and snow. It would be so easy to just stop, to let the cold take her. It would be a cleaner end than the one Absalom Finch had planned. From the canyon, a man's voice echoed, "This way! She's bleeding!" She had cut her hand on a rock hours ago. A small, stupid injury, but she had left a trail. Panic, cold and sharp, did what her will could not. Delilah scrambled to her feet. She was off the game trail now, plunging into the deep, untouched woods that climbed the side of the mountain. It was harder going. The snow was up to her thighs, a sugary, sinking trap. Every step was a battle. But they would be slower, too. They had horses and dogs. She had only desperation. She did not see the wire. It was strung low, between two young aspens, nearly invisible in the gloom. Her boot caught it. She was pitched forward, her arms flailing, her head heavy with exhaustion. Struck something solid and dark hiding in the snow, a half-buried piece of granite. There was no sound, no pain, just a sudden, pressing silence as the world dissolved into black. Silas Boone found her an hour later. He was checking his trap line, cursing the incoming storm. He was a massive man, built on the scale of the mountains themselves, with a beard thick and grizzled as a badger's pelt. He lived alone, had lived alone for 10 years, and preferred it that way. People were trouble. They brought noise and sickness and laws. He was expecting a marten, or maybe a fox. What he found was a woman. He stopped, his great body going still. He stared at the dark shape half buried in the snow, tangled in his ruined wire. His first feeling was not pity, but a deep, profound annoyance. The snare was broken. And this was a complication. He knelt, the motion stiff in his heavy buffalo coat. He brushed the snow from her face. She was young, too young for this mountain. Her skin was a pale, waxy blue. He saw the dark bruise on her cheek, the dried blood on her lip. She was wearing a city dress, thin wool and lace, soaked through and already freezing stiff. Stupid. Only a fool came up here dressed for a church social. He put a gloved hand to her neck, under her jaw. He felt for a pulse, expecting none. A faint, thready flutter. Silas sighed. It was a sound like grinding stones. The mountain had tried to take her, but it had failed, which meant the problem was now his. He could leave her. Walk away. The blizzard would finish the job by midnight. It would be the sensible thing to do, He had not survived this long by being a sentimentalist. But the bruise on her face, it looked like a man's fist. He thought of his Mary, dead and gone, and the rage he'd felt when a miner in Greystone had spoken ill of her. He thought of his boy, Timothy, lost to the blast. He hadn't been there to save either of them. With a low growl that was part curse, part surrender, he cut the wire from her boot. He checked her head, a nasty lump, bleeding sluggishly. He slipped his arms under her, one beneath her knees, one behind her back. She weighed nothing, a bundle of wet rags and cold bones. He stood, easily, and turned back toward his cabin, angry at the disruption, angry at the world that had thrown this piece of flotsam onto his land. But beneath the anger, a different, colder feeling stirred. He was disturbed by her fragile condition. This was how people died. This was how his people had died. He carried her back to the hand-built log cabin that sat high on the ridge, a fortress against the world. Smoke plumed from the stone chimney. He kicked the door open with his boot and carried her inside, into the heat and the scent of pine smoke, laying her down on the bearskin rug in front of the hearth. Delilah woke to warmth. It was the first thing she registered, a deep, penetrating warmth that seemed to be pulling her up from a great, dark depth. The second was the smell, wood smoke and coffee, and something else, something wild and musky. She opened her eyes. The light was dim, golden, coming from a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall. She was lying on a pallet of furs. She tried to sit up, and a wave of dizziness slammed her back down. Her head ached, a sharp, specific pain above her right temple. She looked down at herself. Panic seized her throat. She was half naked. Her dress and petticoats were gone. She was wearing only her thin chemise, and it was dry. Over her lay a mountain of furs, a heavy, cured buffalo hide and several rabbit pelts, impossibly soft. "Where?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "You're in my cabin." The voice came from the shadows. It was deep, like rocks shifting. Delilah scrambled backward, pulling the furs up to her chin, her heart hammering against her ribs. A figure emerged from the corner. He was a giant. She had never seen a man so large, not in frame or in height. He was dressed in buckskins and a wool shirt, and his face was almost entirely lost in a thicket of dark, grizzled beard. He held a knife, a long, wicked-looking blade. He had been sharpening it. This was it. She had escaped Absalom Finch only to be captured by some mountain creature, a hermit, a creep. "Where are my clothes?" she demanded, trying to sound brave, though her voice shook. The giant didn't move. He just looked at her, his eyes flat and unreadable in the firelight. He used the knife to point. "Hangin'. They were froze solid. You'd have lost your feet by morning if I left 'em." She followed his gaze. Her dress, her shift, and her stockings were hanging from a rope strung near the fire. Her boots were on the floor, steaming. "You had no right," she said, clutching the fur. "Right?" He gave a short, harsh laugh that sounded like a cough. "I had the right to check my trap line. Found you in it. You're lucky I didn't skin you." He wasn't leering. He wasn't threatening. He was just stating a fact. He turned his back to her and went back to his work, the scrape of steel on stone filling the small room. Delilah watched him. He was not trying to harm her. He was, she realized with a jolt, the one who had saved her. He had brought her here. He had stripped her of her wet, frozen clothes and put her by his fire and covered her. He had done it not with lust, but with the same practicality he might use on a freezing calf. She was alive. The realization did not bring her comfort. It brought rage. She was trapped, again, just in a different, wilder cage. "I need to leave," she said, pushing herself up onto her elbows. The room spun. "Go ahead," he said, not turning around. "Door's right there." She looked. The door was a heavy plank of wood. Through a small window cut into the opposite wall, she saw nothing but a churning, solid wall of white. The wind howled, a high, mournful scream that sounded human. "It's snowing," she said, stating the obvious. "Blizzard," he corrected. "Started about the time I brought you in. We're shut in. Could be 2 days. Could be a week. A week, trapped in a one-room cabin with this giant. You can't keep me here," she snapped, her fear turning to a familiar, sharp-tongued defense. "What kind of man lives like this? Hiding in the mountains, trapping women?" He stopped sharpening the knife. He stood up, slowly, and turned to face her. He was terrifying. He took 2 steps toward the fire, and the light illuminated the deep scars on his hands and a long, faded white line that ran from his temple into his beard. "I don't trap women," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "They're usually smart enough to stay down in the valleys where they belong. You're the one who came up here." "I was running." "Running from what? A husband you didn't like? A father who told you to do your chores?" He spat into the fire. "You look like city money, all soft, spoiled. You're a runaway, and you're trouble. I don't like trouble." "And you're a hermit," she shot back, her voice rising. "A creep, hiding up here, waiting to... "To what?" he growled, stepping closer. She flinched, but held his gaze. "You know nothing about me, and I want nothing from you. The moment that snow stops, I am leaving." "Good," Silas Boone said. He pointed to a small crate by the fire. "There's jerky and water in the bucket. Don't touch my tools, don't get in my way, and don't waste firewood." He turned his back on her, dismissing her completely. He pulled a heavy bench to the wall, sat down, and began to painstakingly repair the webbing on a snowshoe. The blizzard raged for 4 days. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the log cabin. It was a small space, barely 15 paces from one end to the other. A stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, a single cot, which he had given to her, and his own bedroll, which he laid by the door every night with his rifle beside him. Delilah, her head healing and her strength returning, felt like a caged animal. At first, she stayed on the cot, watching him, but a person could only lie still for so long. She started to observe. His life was a routine of quiet, deliberate actions. He rose before the light, fed the fire, and put coffee on to boil. He would check his small store of wood, then sit and work. He skinned the 2 rabbits he'd collected before finding her. His massive, scarred hands were surprisingly gentle, moving with a speed and precision that was almost artistic. He wasted nothing. The pelts were stretched, the meat was hung, the sinew saved for thread. He had a dog, an old, 3-legged hound with a milky eye, who lived in a warm box near the fire. The animal, which Silas called Patch, was his only companion, and the way he treated the animal, it confused her. Silas, who dismissed her as a spoiled runaway, would share his own meager portion of stew with the dog. He would scratch its ears, his low, rumbling voice softening. "Hurts today, don't it, old boy?" He'd murmur, rubbing the dog's lame hip. "This cold gets in the bones, but the snow's good. It'll keep the world away." Delilah watched him fix his snowshoes, his brow furrowed in concentration. She watched him care for the dog with a tenderness he showed nothing and no one else. This was not the brute she had first seen. This was something more complicated. On the 3rd night, she had the nightmare. She was back in Greystone, at the saloon, the night her father lost everything. Absalom Finch was there, his tailored suit smelling of whiskey and cigars. He was smiling, his teeth yellow. He was holding up the contract. "She's mine, boys," he was saying, "paid in full." Then his hands were on her, his fingers biting into her arms, pulling her toward the stairs. She was screaming, but no one was listening. Her father was just drinking, his back to her. Delilah woke up with a choked cry. Sitting bolt upright on the cot, she was tangled in the furs. her heart pounding so hard she thought it would break her ribs. The cabin was dark, save for the red-orange glow of the dying embers in the hearth. In an instant, Silas was on his feet, his rifle in his hands, leveled at the door. He was a shadow, a massive, threatening shape in the darkness. "What?" he demanded. "What'd you hear?"
"No, nothing,"
she gasped, trying to catch her breath.
"It was a dream. Just a dream."
Silas stared at her for a long moment. He could see her shaking, her eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with him. He slowly, deliberately, lowered the rifle. He set the butt on the floor. "Just a dream," he growled. He sounded angry. He was about to turn away, to go back to his bedroll, but she broke. A sob tore out of her. It was not a quiet, ladylike sound. It was a raw, aching sound of a person who had held on for too long, who had run too far, and who had finally, completely, run out of strength. She buried her face in her hands and wept, her shoulders shaking. Silas froze. He was a man who understood blizzards and bear attacks and the silence of the high lonesome. He did not understand this emotion. It was loud. It was messy. It was the thing he had come up here to escape. "Stop that," he said, his voice rough. "There's nothing out there but snow. Nothing's gonna get you."
"He'll find me,"
she whispered, the words torn from her.
"They'll find me. They won't stop."
She couldn't stop crying. It was a storm inside her, as violent as the one outside. Silas let out a long breath. It frosted in the cold air. He walked over, his heavy boots silent on the wood floor. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just sat down on the floor, his back against the log wall, a few feet from her cot. He just sat. He sat there, a massive, silent guardian, his rifle resting across his knees, and stared into the fire. He didn't offer a single word of comfort. He didn't tell her it would be all right. He just stayed. He shared the small, dark space with her, a witness to her pain. After a long time, her sobs quieted down to shudders, and eventually, exhausted, she lay back down, pulling the furs over her. He didn't move until her breathing was deep and even, and the gray light of a false dawn had begun to creep in through the one small window. The next day, the barrier between them was different. The clash was gone, replaced by a heavy, shared silence. The wind had died, and the snow had stopped. Delilah was stirring the last of the rabbit stew. It was thin, but hot. "They'll be looking for me," she said, her voice quiet. She was not speaking to him, but to the fire. Silas was cleaning his rifle, rubbing it with an oilcloth. "Who's they?" "The men I was running from. The men hired by my fiancé." Silas's hand stopped. "Husband?" "No," she spat the word, her old fire returning for a moment.
"Never. My father, he owed a debt, a gambling debt. He lost everything, and when there was nothing left to wager, he wagered me."
Silas stared at the rifle in his hands. He'd seen this before, down in the mining towns. Women as property, women as collateral. It was the law of the world, a law he had come to the mountains to forget. "He's a railroad man," she continued, her voice flat. "Absalom Finch. He likes breaking things. He told my father he liked a woman with spirit, so he could be the one to train it out of her." Silas nodded. Slowly, he said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by the bubble of the stew and the soft whisper of the oilcloth. Delilah had confessed her shame. Now, he felt the need to balance the scale. He looked at his own hands, the scars from knives, and traps, and a life of hard work. "This cabin," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I built it for my wife, Mary." Delilah froze, the spoon still in her hand. She turned to look at him. Is she... "Gone," he said, flat,
A fact, like the snow. 10 years, fever, took her in a week.
He didn't look at Delilah. He kept rubbing the gun.
Our boy, Timothy, he went before her. A mine blast, down in Greystone. He was just 14. Wanted to be a man. Came home in a pine box.
Delilah had no words. The sharp-tongued, educated woman from the city had nothing to say.
I'm sorry,
she whispered, but the words felt small and useless. He shrugged, a heavy movement of his massive shoulders.
Was a long time ago.
He set the rifle aside.
I ain't touched a woman,
he said, his voice even lower.
In, God, near 15 years, I reckon. Not since Mary was well, not since the world made any sense.
He was not threatening her. He was not propositioning her. He was confessing. He was telling her who he was. A widower. A father with no child. A man so broken by the world, he had left it entirely. Delilah looked at this giant, scarred, old man, this hermit, this creep, and for the first time since she had fled Greystone, she did not feel afraid. She felt a strange, aching kinship. They were two ghosts, trapped by a blizzard, hiding from a world that had taken everything from them both. The quiet of the cabin was a living thing after their confessions. The blizzard's end felt less like a relief and more like a deadline. The world, locked out for days, was now waiting just beyond the door. Delilah knew she could not stay, but the thought of leaving, of returning to the ice-cold terror of Absalom Finch, was a paralysis. She could not be a burden. Her father had raised her to be ornamental, to read poetry and play the pianoforte, but her mother had, in small, secret ways, taught her to be useful. She began to rise when Silas did, in the gray, frozen dark.
I'll make the coffee,
she said, her voice small. On the first morning. He grunted, not looking at her, and went outside to break the ice on the water barrel. When he returned, she had the fire stoked and the pot set to boil. He stopped, just for a second, in the doorway. He was not used to the smell of coffee he hadn't made. He said nothing, but he did not shove her aside. She found his mending kit. It was a simple roll of leather holding a few blunt needles and some sinew. His wool socks, the ones he washed and dried by the fire each night, were riddled with holes. She sat on the cot, her cot. He had not taken it back, and began to darn. Her hands were small and deft. She had mended her own lace. But this was different. This was coarse wool, stiff with dirt and wear. She worked at it, her head bent, the firelight catching the auburn in her hair. Silas sat at his table, oiling his traps, the scrape of metal on metal filling the room. He watched her. He watched her hands. He had not seen a woman so. Not really, not in 15 years. Mary's hands had been... He shut the thought down. This girl was not Mary. This girl was a complication. Her presence had changed the air in his cabin. It smelled different. Not just of her, though there was that, a faint, clean scent underneath the wood smoke, like soap. But it was lighter. The small space, which had been his refuge, now felt charged. He found himself avoiding her side of the room. He would turn his back to her when he spoke. His words clipped. More wood, he'd say.
The stew is hot,
she'd reply. She learned his rhythms. She gathered kindling from the pile he kept sheltered, her arms aching from the unfamiliar work. She cooked, taking his meager stores of salt pork, beans, and dried rabbit and turning them into stews that were more than just boiled. He ate, his beard hiding his expression. It's fine, he said once, after a long silence. For her, it was a high compliment. Delilah, too, was conflicted. This man, Silas Boone, was everything her father had warned her against. He was coarse. He was uneducated. Likely he was old, with gray in his beard and deep lines etched around his eyes. He was scarred. He was a hermit, a social outcast. But she had never felt safer. She had lived in a fine house in Greystone, surrounded by fine things and fine people, and her own father had sold her. Absalom Finch, with his clean fingernails and cologne, had struck her, and his eyes had promised worse. Silas had not laid a hand on her. He had given her his bed. He had fed her. He had sat with her in the dark while she wept. His silence was a wall, but it was a wall that protected her, not one that imprisoned her. She would watch him when he thought she wasn't looking. His hands, they were massive, calloused, and stained, but they were a marvel. He could carve a perfect snare trigger with a few flicks of his knife, or gentle his three-legged dog with a touch that was almost loving. The tension in the cabin was a high-strung wire, like the one that had caught her ankle. They were too aware of each other. The space was too small. A brush of arms as they passed by the hearth felt like a spark. On the 6th day, Silas made a pronouncement. "You need a bath." Delilah flushed. I beg your pardon?" "You stink," he said, not unkindly. "Of sweat and fear and this cabin, and I need to boil the lice out of your clothes." She was mortified, but he was right. She had been wearing the same chemise for days, and her dress, while clean of snow, was stained and grim. It was an enormous undertaking. He spent 2 hours melting snow, hauling buckets from the creek, and heating them one by one over the fire. He filled a large tin washtub that he dragged in from a shed. The cabin filled with steam. "It's ready," he grunted. He tossed a bar of harsh lye soap onto the cot. "I'll be outside, checking the perimeter. Don't be long. The water won't stay hot." He grabbed his rifle and his coat and left, shutting the heavy door behind him. Delilah was alone. She stared at the tub. It was the greatest luxury she could imagine. She barred the door, her hands trembling slightly. She stripped off her chemise and, after a moment's hesitation, her dress, she piled her ruined clothes in the corner. She stepped into the water. It was hot, almost too hot, and she sank down with a sigh that was part relief, part sob. She scrubbed her skin raw, washing her hair with the harsh soap until it squeaked. She let the heat soak into her bones, into the bruises left by Finch. For the first time in a week, she felt human. Outside, Silas stamped his feet in the snow. He was not checking the perimeter. He was standing by the woodpile, acutely aware of the woman in his cabin, naked and wet, just a few inches of log and plaster away. He felt proprietary. He felt angry. He felt a deep, aching loneliness that he had not allowed himself to name for a decade. He was a fool for bringing her in, a fool for letting her stay, a fool for heating the water. He should have sent her on her way. He was cold. He needed more wood for the night. Anyway, he tried to time it. He waited a long time, listening to the wind in the pines. He figured she must be done. He moved to the cabin, his arms full of split pine. He kicked the door with his boot. "Coming in," he called, a moment too late. The bar was still on the door, but the door itself, the latch was old. The wood had swollen. She had not pushed the bar all the way into its bracket. His kick meant only to knock, was enough to jostle the bar loose. The door swung open a few inches. Delilah was just standing up. The steam was thick, but the firelight was behind her, painting her in silhouette. She was a shape of shadow and gold, a curve of hip, the long, pale line of her back, the dark tangle of her wet hair. She let out a small, sharp gasp, snatching at a blanket. Silas froze. He stared. He did not mean to. He knew he should not. It was a theft, but he was rooted to the spot. It had been so long since he had seen anything soft, anything whole, anything woman. He saw the line of her shoulder, the vulnerability of her neck. His heart hammered in his chest. A heavy, sick thud. "Get out!" she shrieked, and it was the sound, not the words, that broke the spell. He dropped the wood. slamming the door shut so hard the cabin shook. The bar, he stammered to the wood. It didn't hold. He backed away, grabbing his rifle from where it leaned against the wall. He fled, his face burning with a guilt so profound it tasted like bile. He plunged into the woods, walking, almost running, until the cold air seared his lungs. He had stared too long. He had violated the one rule of this harsh land. You do not take what is not offered. He was no better than Finch. He was a lecherous old man. He did not return until well after dark. Delilah was by the fire, dressed in her own, now clean chemise, which she'd washed and dried. She was wrapped in two of his thickest blankets, her hair, still damp, combed out with her fingers. She was pale, but her eyes were defiant. Silas did not look at her. He stalked to the hearth, his face a mask of stone, and took off his coat. He was restless. The cabin, which had been a haven, now felt like a cage, full of the scent of soap and his own shame. He could still see her silhouette, burned into his mind. He picked up his axe.
"What are you doing?"
she asked, her voice tight. "It's night. Need wood," he growled, and he went back outside, slamming the door behind him. He did not put on his coat. He did not even keep his wool shirt on. He tore it off, throwing it into the snow. The cold was a shock, a sudden, violent embrace. It was what he needed. He stalked to the woodpile, his breath pluming in the moonlight. He was trying to cool off. He began to chop. He did not need the wood. The pile was high. He was chopping to exhaust himself. He was chopping to punish the feelings twisting in his gut. The axe rose and fell. The thud of the steel into the frozen pine the only sound. He chopped until his shoulders burned and sweat ran down his chest, steaming in the frigid air. He was trying to drive the image of her from his mind. He was trying to become the mountain again, cold and hard and unfeeling. Delilah heard him. The sound was brutal, desperate. She went to the window, rubbing the frost from the glass. She saw him. He was a giant in the moonlight, his back and shoulders slick with sweat, the muscles moving like ropes under his skin. The cold was biting, well below freezing, and he was shirtless. He was going to kill himself. She did not think. She grabbed the heaviest wool blanket from her cot and, barefoot, unbarred the door and ran out into the snow.
"Silas!"
she cried. He stopped, the axe in mid-swing. He turned, his chest heaving. He looked wild, his eyes dark, his beard frosted. "Get inside, girl," he growled. You're a fool," she said, her teeth chattering. The snow was burning her feet. She ran to him, her hands trembling, and threw the blanket around his massive shoulders. "You'll catch your death." Her fingers brushed the hot, damp skin of his chest. He flinched as if she had struck him. He was so hot, and she was so cold. He could smell the soap on her skin. He looked down at her, this small, brave, foolish woman, standing barefoot in a blizzard's aftermath for his sake. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice thick. "Neither should you," she whispered, not moving away. She was inside his space now. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. The tension was a physical thing, a rope pulled taut between them. She was so close. The air was electric. "A man your age," she said, her voice shaking, but a spark of her old, sharp self returning. She was trying to break the spell. "Out here like this, are you trying to impress me?" He looked away, at the dark line of the trees. "Don't!" "I'm afraid I'm too young to appreciate it," she pushed, her voice a little breathless. "You're too old for me, Mr. Boone." It was a jab, meant to be a joke, a way to lighten the air, but it hit him like a physical blow. It landed on the raw, open wound of his guilt. He turned his head, his eyes full of a pain so deep it shocked her. "I know what I am," he growled, his voice ripping from his chest. He was not talking to her.
but to himself, to God, to Mary's ghost. I'm too old, too big, too broken. He had confirmed every fear, every shame. He was a monster. He was a broken thing. He was not a man for a woman like her. Delilah looked at him, at the self-loathing etched on his face, and her heart, which she thought had been frozen solid, cracked. He was not a monster. He was just a man who had been alone for 15 years, a man who had seen her, all of her, and had run out into the snow to punish himself for it. She felt a wave of something, a tenderness so fierce it stole her breath. He was not Absalom Finch. He did not see her as property. He saw her as a temptation, a sin, and it was tearing him apart. She reached up, her small, cold hand trembling, and touched his beard, a gesture so bold it shocked them both. He went perfectly still. "Then act like you're mine," she whispered, the words a puff of white in the night air. "Just once. Pretend." Silas looked down at her. He searched her face. He saw no fear. He saw no mockery. He saw need, a need as deep and as vast as his own. He let the axe fall into the snow. He put his scarred, calloused hand over hers, holding it against his face. He leaned down, slowly, giving her every chance to flee. She did not flee. She rose on her toes. Their lips met. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hesitant. At first, a question. His lips were cold from the night, his beard rough. Then she pressed closer, and something inside him broke. The dam he had built for 15 years, it crumbled. A low groan came from his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, one hand tangling in her damp hair, the other pulling her against his body. He lifted her off her feet. The blanket fell away. He was all heat and muscle and desperation. She was small and soft, and she was kissing him back. It was charged, full of a hunger that was not just for the flesh, but for comfort, for life, for a single moment of not being alone. He kissed her with all the grief and all the loneliness of a decade. She clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, meeting his hunger with her own. This was not the oily, wet-lipped kiss of Absalom Finch. This was fire. This was a storm. He carried her. He took 2 steps toward the cabin, his mouth never leaving hers. He was going to... And then he stopped. Shame, cold and sharp as the snow at his feet, flooded him. What was he doing? This was a child, a runaway, frightened and desperate. She wasn't in her right mind, and he was an old man, taking advantage of her, of the safety he himself had provided. He was what she'd called him, a creep. He pulled away, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He set her down, gently, but it felt like a rejection. He was shaking. "I can't," he whispered, his voice ravaged. He would not look at her. He bent and retrieved the blanket, wrapping it around her, his movements stiff and formal. "Silas," she began. "No." He backed away, putting space between them. I can't be what you want. I'm not him. I'm not any man for you." He turned his back on her, picked up his axe, and began chopping wood again. His swings wild and imprecise, as if he were fighting an invisible enemy. Delilah stood there for a long moment, the blanket clutched to her chest. She watched his broad, powerful back, the muscles tensed against the cold. Then, her heart aching with a new and unfamiliar confusion, she turned and went back inside, barring the door behind her. The next morning, the air in the cabin was so thick it was hard to breathe. They pretended nothing had happened. "Coffee's hot," Silas said, his back to her. "I'll see to the bread," she replied, her voice too high. They moved around each other with a new, painful awareness. They did not speak of it. They did not acknowledge it. But it was there. It was in the way their gazes met, then lingered for a fraction of a second too long before darting away. It was in the way his hand, passing her the salt,
brushed her fingers, and they both recoiled as if burned. Delilah watched him mending his traps, her breath catching in her throat. Silas would be stoking the fire, and he would be overwhelmingly aware of her. Sitting on the cot, her knees drawn up, mending his sock, the pretense of ignoring it, the shared, silent denial, was more intimate than the kiss itself. The thaw came 2 days later, not as a warmth, but as a cessation. The wind stopped its high, keening howl. The snow ceased its endless assault. A heavy, pregnant silence fell over the mountain, and the air, for the first time in a week, felt thin and sharp, holding the promise of a bitter cold, but a clear sky. Silas broke the silence. He had been outside for an hour, his movements sharp, almost angry. He came back in, his boots stamping hard on the floor. He dropped a small, deer-hide pack on the table. It was not empty. "The storm's passed," he said. He did not look at her. His voice was a flat, dead sound, the voice of the man he had been before she fell into his trap line. "There's a game trail south of the ridge. If you follow it down, staying out of the deep drifts, you'll hit the canyon. 2 days' walk, maybe 3. You'll reach the stage road to Greystone." Delilah, who had been folding the blanket on the cot, went still. Her hands froze. He went to the hearth, poking the fire. "I packed you jerky, a handful of beans, a fire starter, and a good knife." He nodded to the pack. "More than I started with." It was a dismissal. It was the answer to the kiss they had not spoken of. He was pushing her out. She felt a cold dread, colder than the snow, seep into her belly. Outside was danger. Outside was Absalom Finch and the men he paid. Outside was a world that had tried to sell her. In here was a different kind of danger. A man who could ignite her with a touch and then freeze her with his silence. "You're just sending me out?" she asked, her voice quiet, but with a sharp edge of disbelief. To where? To him?" Silas turned, and his face was a mask of stone. The scars, the lines, the grizzled beard. They were a fortress. "I ain't sending you," he growled. "I'm letting you go. I told you, I don't like trouble. You're free to leave." The unspoken words hung between them. "And I am free of you." Pride, that old, bitter friend, rose in her. She had not begged her father, who had sold her. She had not begged Absalom Finch, who had hit her. She would be damned if she would beg this mountain man, who had kissed her like he was starving and then looked at her like she was a sickness. "Fine," she said. She walked to the pack, her back straight. She picked it up. It was heavy. He had been generous. The thought almost broke her. She slung it over her shoulder. She went to the corner where her dress, still stained but now dry and stiff, was hanging. She began to pull it on over her chemise. She did not ask for privacy. The intimacy of the cabin had been shattered. Silas watched her. He watched her pull the wool over her head, saw the line of her back as she fastened the buttons. Every small movement was a torment. He was doing the right thing. She was young. She was life. He was a hermit, an old man haunted by ghosts. He had no right to her. That kiss, that night, it was a moment of weakness, a sin he had to atone for. This was his penance, pushing away the first living thing that had made him feel human in 15 years. She put on her boots, the ones he had oiled and dried. They were still poor protection against the deep snow. She would be lucky to last a day. He knew it. He hated himself for it. Delilah walked to the door. She put her hand on the wooden latch. She did not look back. "Thank you," she said, her voice formal. "For the food, and for the mending." She opened the door. The light that flooded in was blinding, a sharp, white glare from the new-fallen snow. It illuminated her, made her a silhouette, like the one he had seen in the bath. "Don't go!" a part of him screamed. "Stay!" He said nothing. He just watched her step out, his face rigid, and pull the door shut behind her. The cabin was instantly, terribly, silent. The only sound was the pop of the fire. The smell of her, of soap and of woman, was still in the air. He sat at his table and picked up a piece of wood. Pulling his knife, he began to carve, his movements precise and empty. He was a man cutting his own heart out to see if it was still beating. Delilah walked for nearly an eighth of a mile, her pride carrying her. The snow was deeper than she had imagined, a trackless, sparkling desert. The game trail he'd spoken of was a faint depression, nothing more. Every step was a labor. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. She was not just walking away from Silas. She was walking toward something, toward Finch, toward the men hunting her. The reality of her situation settled on her like the snow. She was alone. She had been a fool to think a kiss meant anything. To him, she was just a storm that had passed. She reached a copse of aspens, their thin, white trunks like the bars of a cage. She stopped to catch her breath, leaning against a tree, her lungs burning. This was hopeless. She was just as lost, just as doomed, as the day she'd fled. "Well, well, look what the snowcat dragged in." The voice was not Silas's. It was slick and oily, and full of a cruel amusement. Delilah's head snapped up. A man stepped out from behind a large granite boulder. He was not big like Silas. He was wiry, dressed in a long duster, his face thin and pockmarked, a gray hat pulled low. He was chewing on a piece of jerky. He had a pistol holstered on his hip. I don't know who you are," Delilah said, pushing herself off the tree, trying to edge away. "Oh, I think you do," the man said, smiling. He had a few yellow teeth. "Or at least you know my employer, Mr. Absalom Finch, name's Quill. We was tracking you when that blizzard hit. My partners gave you up for dead. Went back to Greystone, but I'm a patient man. I figured I'd check the high ground." He took a step closer. "And here you are, all tucked in, fed, with a nice new pack. Who's been keeping you, girl? Some old trapper?" "Leave me alone," she said, her voice shaking. She looked back the way she'd come. The cabin was not visible. She was alone. "Oh, I can't do that. The bounty's $500 for you. Returned. Intact." He licked his lips. "But Mr. Finch, he said he'd pay an extra $100 for you to be lessoned, taught some manners before you got back to him, and I aim to collect that $100. He lunged. He was fast. He grabbed the strap of her pack, yanking her forward. She stumbled, falling to her knees in the deep snow. He was on her, his wiry strength surprising. He grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked her head back. "Please," she gasped. "No." "Oh, I'm gonna," he hissed, his face close to hers. "A high-toned piece like you, I'm gonna enjoy this." He struck her, a hard, open-handed slap that snapped her head to the side, splitting her lip again, tasting her own blood. It was the same as Finch. They were all the same. She screamed. It was not a gasp. It was a raw, piercing shriek of pure, undiluted terror and rage, a sound that was not meant for human ears, but for the uncaring sky. Back in the cabin, Silas's knife slipped. He cut his thumb, a deep, clean slice. He stared at the welling of dark red blood, unfeeling. And then he heard it. The scream. It was thin, carried on the wind, but it was hers. It cut through the wood, through the stone, and struck him directly in the spine. His body moved before his mind did. The man who had been carving, the hermit, was gone. In his place was something else. He did not grab his coat. He did not grab his hat. He grabbed the rifle that was always leaning by the door, and he was out, his moccasins silent, his great legs eating up the snow, moving faster than any man his size had a right to. He followed the sound. He followed her trail in the snow. He saw where she had stopped. He saw the other, deeper boot prints. He found them by the aspens. Quill had her on the ground. He had her dress ripped at the shoulder, his hand fumbling with her buttons. She was fighting, her hands balled into fists, beating against his back, but he was laughing, a low, wet sound. "That's it, girl. Fight," gives it flavor. Silas did not shout. He did not announce himself. He simply raised his rifle, but he was too close. And the man, Quill, was quick. He heard the crunch of Silas's final step and rolled, dragging Delilah up as a shield, his pistol out and leveled. "Don't move, old man," Quill snarled, his arm tight around Delilah's throat. She was gasping, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on Silas. "Or I'll put a bullet in her pretty face." Silas froze. He held his rifle at his waist. He looked at Delilah. He looked at the man holding her, and a rage, a cold, pure rage he had not felt since the day he'd heard of the mine collapse, settled over him. It was not hot. It was glacial. "Let her go," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Drop the rifle, Grandpa," Quill spat, "or I'll—" Silas shot him. He didn't aim at the man. He aimed at the rock just beside Quill's head. He fired the rifle from his hip. The boom was deafening in the pass. The bullet sparked, sending a shower of granite chips and lead fragments into Quill's face. The man screamed, dropping Delilah, his hands flying to his eyes. "My eyes, God, my eyes!" Delilah scrambled away, crawling through the snow. "Silas!" Quill, blinded and in agony, fired his pistol wildly. Bang, bang, bang! The bullets whined past Silas's head, snapping through the aspens. Silas did not fire back. He dropped the rifle and charged. He crossed the 20 feet between them in 2 great strides. He was a force of nature, an avalanche of muscle and fury. Quill, still clutching his bleeding face, heard him coming. He tried to raise the pistol. Silas's hand, the one he had just cut, clamped down on the man's wrist. The sound of bone snapping was a sharp, wet crack in the cold air. The pistol fell into the snow. "You broke my—" Quill gasped, and then he looked up. He saw the face of the man who had him. It was not a human face. It was something from an old, dark story. "You touched her," Silas said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. He hit Quill, one time, a massive, scarred fist into the man's pockmarked face. It was not a slap. It was a blow, like a hammer striking an anvil. There was a sound of breaking cartilage, and Quill's head snapped back. He fell, limp, and did not move. But Silas was not done. The rage was on him, a blind, red fog. He had lost his wife. He had lost his son. He would not. He fell on the man, his hands finding Quill's throat. He was not just killing him, he was unmaking him. He squeezed, his thumbs digging deep, his own blood from his cut thumb mixing with the man's. He shook him, like a dog with a rabbit, lifting him from the snow. "Silas, stop! You're killing him!" Delilah's voice. It cut through the red fog. He stopped. His hands were still locked around the man's throat. He looked down. Quill's eyes were open, bulging, lifeless. His neck was at a terrible angle. He was dead. Silas let him drop. The body fell, a boneless thing, into the snow. He was panting. His chest heaved. He looked at his hands. They were covered in blood. His and the dead man's. He was a killer. He had brought death to his mountain. He heard a sound, a small, choking sob. He turned. Delilah was huddled against the aspen, her dress torn, her lip bleeding anew. She was looking at him, not at the body. Her face was a mask of terror, and something else. Gratitude, awe. She had seen him, the real him, the brute, the animal. He took a step toward her. "Delilah." She did not flinch. She did not run. She pushed herself up and ran to him. She threw herself against his massive, heaving chest, her arms locking around his waist. She buried her face in his wool shirt and sobbed, her entire body shaking.
You came, she wept. You came. He was, you. Silas stood frozen, his bloody hands held out, afraid to touch her. But she was holding him, clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just tried to swallow her whole. Slowly, his arms came down. He wrapped them around her, his great blood-stained hands settling on her back, holding her, pulling her in until he could feel her heart beating against his. "I'm here," he whispered, the words ragged. "I'm here." She cried for a long time. He just held her. Finally, her sobs quieted. She pulled back, just enough to look up at him. "Don't send me away," she whispered, her voice raw. "Please, Silas, don't make me go. Let me stay. Let me stay with you." He looked at her bruised face, at the terror still swimming in her eyes, and at the dead man lying 10 feet away. The world had not been kept out. It was here, and it was his fault. "He'll have partners," Silas said, his voice flat, practical. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold reality. "This one," he said. "They went back. They might not have, or they'll come looking for him." He looked at the body. We have to move him." They buried him. It was a grim, silent task. The ground was frozen, but Silas found a deep drift in a ravine, under a shelf of rock. He used his knife to cut branches, and together they dragged the body. Delilah did not cry. She worked, her face pale and set. She did as he instructed. They covered the body with snow, then with heavy rocks. It was not a grave. It was a hiding place. It would hold until the spring thaw, and by then the animals would have... He didn't let his mind go there. When it was done, they stood in the silent woods. The sun was beginning to drop, painting the snow in shades of pink and lavender. It was beautiful, and it was terrible. "Let's go home," Silas said, and the word home hung in the air, heavy with new meaning. He led the way back. She walked in his footsteps, her hand clutching the rifle he had given her to hold. Back in the cabin, the fire was low. The space, which had felt like a cage, now felt like a sanctuary. He bolted the door. He built up the fire until it roared, chasing the shadows from the corners. Delilah sank onto the cot. She was shaking again, the reaction setting in. He poured a cup of coffee. It was still lukewarm, and put it in her hands. She drank it, her teeth chattering against the tin. He went to the water bucket, broke the thin film of ice, and washed his hands. He scrubbed the blood off, his and Quill's, watching the water turn a faint, rusty pink. She was watching him. "He's dead," she said, her voice a whisper. "Aye," Silas said, his back to her. "He is. You killed him. For me." He dried his hands on a rag. He turned to face her. "He was wrong? What he was doing? And what you did, was that wrong?" He had no answer. He just looked at her. She stood up from the cot. She was trembling, but her eyes were clear. She walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the floor. I have nothing," she said, her voice breaking. "My father sold me. That man, he would have—" "Don't," he said, his voice rough. "I have nothing to pay you for my life," she said. She was standing in front of him now, so close she had to tilt her head back. She was crying again, but silently, the tears just rolling down her bruised cheeks. "I have nothing except this." She reached up and took his hand, the one he had cut. She brought it to her lips and kissed the rough, scarred knuckles. "Delilah." "No," he whispered. It was a plea. He knew where this was going. He was old and broken, and now he was a killer. He was not a man for this. "Please," she sobbed, a flood of tears and desperation. She pressed his hand to her cheek. I don't want to be alone. I'm so scared. Just hold me. Show me I'm alive."
She offered herself, not with lust, but with a raw, desperate need to be anchored. She put her arms around his neck, her small, trembling body pressing against his. He resisted. His whole body went rigid. I'm not him, Delilah. I'm not Finch. I won't. Take me, she whispered, her voice fierce. Don't be good, Silas. I don't need a saint. I need a man. I need you. His restraint broke. It had been cracked by the kiss, and the fight had shattered it. This woman, who had been through hell, was not running from him. She was running to him. With a groan that sounded like a man drowning, his arms went around her. He lifted her, his mouth finding hers. It was not like the kiss in the snow. This was a claiming. It was salt and blood and desperation. He carried her to the cot, to the pile of furs, and laid her down. He was clumsy, his hands shaking. He was so big, and she was so small. He was afraid of his own strength, afraid of his own hunger. He made to be gentle, his touch overly careful, reverent, as if she were a piece of fine, fragile glass. She saw it. She felt his hesitation, and it was the one thing she could not bear. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her fingers knotting in the wool. No, she said, her voice a low command. Don't treat me like I'm made of glass. She pulled him down. I'm not broken. I won't break. Her words were a liberation. His caution vanished, replaced by a raw, overwhelming need. They made love in a way that was both a battle and a prayer. It was two broken people, two survivors, trying to feel whole, trying to erase the cold and the death with the simple, driving heat of life. He was not the old man. She was not the victim. They were just Silas and Delilah, man and woman. Afterward, they lay tangled in the furs. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was quiet. Her head was on his chest, her breathing finally, mercifully. Even he was listening to the sound of her, alive, safe. His guilt, which had been burned away by passion, returned. But it was different. It was heavier. He had taken her. He had taken advantage of her fear, her gratitude. When the spring comes, he said, his voice a low rasp in the darkness, the pass will clear. You should still leave. She went still. She lifted her head, her hair cascading over his chest. He could not see her face in the dark, but he could feel her eyes. I won't keep you prisoner, Delilah, he whispered, his shame a bitter taste. You're free. You're always free. She was silent for a long time. He thought she might be crying again. Then she shifted, her voice quiet, but as unyielding as the mountain rock beneath them. I'm not your prisoner, Silas! She leaned down and kissed him, a slow, soft kiss that had no desperation in it, only a quiet certainty. I'm your woman. The death of one man and the birth of a new life, their life, settled over the cabin like a second, deeper winter. The world outside was a blank page of white, the body of Quill buried and forgotten by the snow. But inside, the small space was charged with a new, sharp reality. They were no longer two strangers trapped by a storm. She was, as she had said, his woman, and he, though he fought the word, was her man. Life fell into a rhythm, dictated by the cold and the needs of survival. They lived as husband and wife, a wordless, practical arrangement that felt as old as the mountains themselves. The cot was hers, but she never used it. The great bed of firs and pine boughs, built for one, now held two. At first, they slept with a stiff, careful distance, backs barely touching. But the cold of the high Rockies was a relentless thing. And in the deep hours before dawn, a hand would seek another. A body would turn for warmth. He would wake to find her hair a dark, soft tangle on his chest, her breath a warm, steady puff against his skin. He would lie still, his heart a heavy, aching drum, and feel a tenderness so fierce it felt like a wound. He had not known this simple, quiet rightness, since Mary. And this, he knew, was a betrayal of Mary's ghost. But then Delilah would murmur in her sleep, her hand tightening on his arm, and the ghost would fade, leaving only the living, breathing woman beside him. Their days were a shared labor. He was a trapper, and now, so was she. He taught her, his voice a low, patient rumble. How to read the snow. See here, he'd say, his large, scarred finger pointing not at the track, but at the absence of it. The drift, it's too smooth. Martin's under it. He's got a tunnel. He showed her how to set a snare, not with his brute strength, but with a light, precise touch, so the wire was hidden, the trigger balanced on a breath. She was a quick study. Her hands, once soft and made for pianofortes, grew chapped, then calloused, then strong. She learned to skin their catch, rabbit, marten, the occasional fox, with a clean, quick economy. Her face set in concentration. Her initial revulsion burned away by the simple, driving need for food and fur. The most grueling task was water. All water was snow. All snow had to be hauled, melted, and boiled. It was a constant, back-breaking cycle. They did it together, hauling the heavy tin buckets, their breaths pluming in the frozen air. They would stand over the roaring fire, feeding it logs, waiting for the pot to steam. And in these quiet moments, they learned to talk, not of the future, never of the future, and not yet, not fully, of the past, but of small things. The wind's turning, he'd say, means more snow from the north. We're low on salt, she'd reply, her brow furrowed, and the last of the coffee is almost gone. It was the language of a shared life, a domesticity so profound it unnerved him. One morning, she woke to a new sound, a sharp, rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. She sat up in the furs, her hair unbound, and saw Silas in front of the small, cracked piece of mirror he'd nailed to the wall. He was shirtless, his back a landscape of old scars and hard muscle, and he was shaving. He had found his old straight razor, the one he had not touched in a decade. He had stropped it on his leather belt, and with a mug of hot water and a sliver of lye soap, he was, with slow, careful strokes, removing the beard. Delilah watched, silent, the grizzled mask of the hermit, the badger's pelt of hair that had hidden him from the world, fell away in wet clumps. The man who emerged was a stranger. His jaw was strong, his chin cleft. His mouth, which she had only known as a rough line in the fur, was well-shaped and, surprisingly, achingly, vulnerable. The gray was still there, in the sideburns and stubble, but he was not the ancient creature she had first imagined. He was just a man marked by time, by grief, by the sun. He finished, splashing his face with cold water. He turned, his skin raw and pink, and looked at her. He looked exposed, ashamed, almost. It was itchin', he mumbled. An excuse, and a poor one. Delilah did not laugh. She slid from the bed, wearing one of his long wool shirts as a nightgown, her bare feet silent on the floor. She walked to him. She stood on her toes and put her small, warm hand on his newly bare cheek. "Silas," she whispered. It was the first time she had said his name with such simple, profound intimacy. He closed his eyes at her touch, and that same day, as she was stirring the stew, a small, quiet sound escaped her. The three-legged dog, Patch, had been watching her, and when she dropped a piece of rabbit, he had snatched it with a clumsy, happy snap of his jaws. Delilah laughed. It was not a giggle. It was a real, true, throat-deep sound of amusement. Silas, who was mending a snowshoe, froze. His hands went still. He had never heard her laugh. It was, he decided, a sound that could thaw a mountain. He looked at her, her face flushed from the fire, her eyes crinkling, her lips parted in a smile. and the ache in his chest was so strong he had to look away. The peace, of course, was bought with blood, and the past was not dead. It was not even past. It came for her in the quiet. She would be staring into the fire, her hands idle, her face hardening. He learned to see the signs. "You're gone," he said one evening. He sat on the floor, rubbing oil into his boots. She started, as if woken from a dream. "What?" "You're gone, back to Greystone." Delilah looked at the flames. Her smile, which had been so new, was gone. "I was," she said, her voice flat. "I was at the palace. The night my father—" Silas stopped his work. He waited. He knew how to be patient. The mountain had taught him. "It was a poker game," she said, her voice a monotone, as if reciting a story she had memorized. "A high-stakes game. My father, Thomas Grace, he was always a fool for a high-stakes game. He thought it made him important." She paused, breathing in the smell of wood smoke. "He lost. He kept losing. I was there. My mother and we were made to sit in the ladies' corner, to show, I don't know, that he was a family man, that he was respectable. He lost the house. He lost the deed to his land office. He lost my mother's jewelry, which he'd taken from her." Her hands clenched in her lap. "And then there was nothing left. Absalom Finch, the railroad man. He was winning. He had a stack of chips so high. He's a dreadful man. All tailored suits and cologne. And his eyes, they're like a snake's. No blinking." He leaned back. She continued. "And he said, 'Thomas, you have one thing left of value, one fine, unbroken thing.' And he looked right at me." Silas's hand tightened on the boot, his knuckles white. "My father, he tried to laugh. He said, 'Absalom, you can't mean—'" And Finch just smiled. He slid a stack of chips into the center. "Your debts, Thomas, all of them, wiped clean. For her." "And your mother?" Silas's voice was a low growl. Delilah's eyes were very bright, but she would not cry. "My mother, Eleanor, she was a pale woman. She spent her life being afraid. Afraid of my father's temper, afraid of poverty. She looked at her hands. She just stared at her own hands, in her lap. She didn't say a word, not one. My father, he looked at me, and he said, 'It's a high price, Absalom.' And Finch said, 'She has spirit. I like that. I enjoy breaking in a fine piece of stock.' And my father," she whispered, "the final? Terrible words." He nodded. He said, "Call." She was silent. The fire popped, a sharp, angry sound. "He came over," she said. "Finch, he put his hand on my shoulder. And he told the room, 'She's mine, boys, and I'm taking her home to break her. My mother.'" She never looked up. Not once. Silas said nothing. He could not. There were no words for such a thing. He simply stood up, his great body unfolding. He walked to her, knelt on the hard floor in front of her, and pulled her from the cot. He held her, his arms a fortress, and let her bury her face in his shoulder, her body silent, her grief too deep for tears. He had killed one man for her. He realized, in that dark, quiet moment, that he would kill Absalom Finch. He would kill her father. He would, if he had to, burn Greystone to the ground. The thaw, when it truly began, was not gentle. It was a violent, cracking, muddy affair. The snow melted, the creeks roared, and the world became a high-country swamp. Travel was impossible, but the air was warmer. The sun had strength, and with the clearing of the pass, the world returned. "I'm checking the long line," Silas said one morning. The sun was bright, the air full of the smell of wet pine. "The one up on Eagle Ridge. I'll be gone the day, back by dark." He had shaved again. He looked younger. He looked good. Delilah, who was kneading a small, sad loaf of cornbread, smiled. "Be safe, old man," she teased. He kissed her. It was no longer a desperate, hungry thing. It was a simple, solid kiss of a man leaving for work. "Bolt the door behind me," he said.
I always do. He left, his rifle on his shoulder, Patch trotting, badly, at his heels. Delilah bolted the door. She sang, a small, tuneless song. As she worked, she fed the fire. She mended one of his shirts, the wool soft from wear. The cabin was home. It was safe. The knock came just after noon. It was not a knock. It was a thud, the sound of a rifle butt hitting the door. Delilah froze. "Silas?" she called, her voice high. "Not quite. Girly." A voice drawled. It was a voice she did not know. "Mr. Finch, he's very impatient to see you. Open up!" She looked around, frantic. The rifle? Silas had the rifle. Her eyes fell on his skinning knife, the one she used. "Go away," she shouted, her voice trembling. "He'll kill you. He'll be back." "Oh, we're counting on it," a second voice said. "This one colder. Open the door, or we'll burn this shack to the ground with you in it." A heavy boot kicked the door. The wood groaned. The bar was thick, but it wouldn't hold forever. They were smarter than Quill. They hadn't split up. They had come together. She grabbed the knife. She ran to the fireplace, scrambling up, trying to hide in the small, dark space. It was a child's impulse. The door splintered. 2 men came in, not in a rush, but with a cold, professional ease. They wore range clothes, with heavy coats. Both had repeating rifles. Both had pistols. They saw the fire. They saw the empty room. "Check the cot." The first one, a burly man with a red beard, said. The second one, thin and sallow-faced, just laughed. He walked to the fireplace. He looked up. "Come on down, little rabbit," he said, and he grabbed her ankle. He dragged her out. She fell hard on the stone hearth, the knife clattering away. He pulled her to her feet, his fingers, like talons, bruising her arm. "Well now," said the red-bearded one, whose name was Jed. "She's prettier than Quill said. Worth the trouble." "Finch just wants her back," said the sallow one, whose name was Cole. "Let's tie her and get gone. This place gives me the creeps." "Tie her? Where's the fun in that?" Jed leered, stepping closer. "We got a long ride. Maybe we take a lesson from old Quill. Collect that extra 100 ourselves." He reached for her. Delilah spat in his face. He backhanded her. Hard. She flew back, hitting the cabin wall, her head striking the logs. "You little bitch," Jed growled, wiping his face. "Stop it, Jed," Cole said, his voice bored. "Finch wants her unbroken. He wants to do the breaking. Just tie her hands. We'll take the old man's horse if he has one." "He's got a mule," Jed grumbled. He pulled a length of rope from his belt. "This is going to be a slow trip, stupid mule." They tied her hands, tight, in front of her. They dragged her out of the cabin, the home she had found, and into the muddy, melting snow. They had 2 shod horses. They put her on the mule, her feet tied under its belly. "What about the old man?" Cole asked, mounting his horse. "He finds the cabin empty," Jed said, climbing up. "He'll track us. This is where Finch wants it done, in the canyon. Said he wants to see the old bastard, wants to watch him die. We're just the bait." They rode out, dragging Delilah, and the empty cabin, behind them. Silas returned at dusk, a brace of rabbits on his belt. He was whistling, a low, tuneless sound. Patch was limping, tired but happy. He saw it from 100 yards away. The door. It was not just unbolted. It was broken. It was hanging off one hinge, a dark, gaping wound in the side of his home. "No," he whispered. He ran. He dropped the rabbits, his rifle in his hands. He hit the clearing. "Delilah!" Silence. He burst into the cabin. The fire was almost dead. The cornbread was a hard, cold lump. The skinning knife was on the floor. A cup was overturned, and on the floor, in the mud and ash, were the tracks of 2 men with spurs. He went back outside, his eyes, trained by a lifetime of this. Read the story in the mud. 2 horses, 1 mule, 3 sets of tracks, leaving, 1 set. 1 set was hers. Dragged. He saw where she had spat. He saw where Jed had struck her. the mud disturbed. A cold, clear sanity settled on him. It was not the blind rage of Quill's attack. This was different. This was not a fight. This was an execution. He did not pack. He did not eat. He checked the action on his rifle. He took his long knife from its sheath and tested the edge. He took every bullet he had. He looked at Patch. "Stay," he commanded. "Guard the home." The dog whined, but sat. Silas Boone turned, and in the dying light, he began to follow. He did not walk. He ran. A steady, ground-eating lope that was part man, part wolf. They had a 6-hour lead. They had horses. He had the mountain, and he had a purpose. He tracked them all night. He did not need the light. He could feel their trail, the broken branches, the slick mud of the pass, the dislodged stones. They were moving fast, but they were clumsy. They were valley men. He smelled their fire before he saw it. They had camped in the canyon, just as he knew they would. A deep, narrow cut of rock, easy to defend, but a trap to leave. They had been lazy. They had not posted a watch. They believed the old man was hours, maybe days. Behind them, Silas came in from above. He moved on his belly, over the granite, until he was on the rim of the canyon. Looking down, he saw them. 2 men, a low fire, his mule, tethered, and Delilah. She was tied to a small pine, her hands bound, her hair over her face. She was not moving. Jed, the red-bearded one, was drinking from a flask. Cole, the sallow one, was taking off his boots. "Gonna turn in," Cole said. "You take first watch. Wake me in 3 hours." "Fine," Jed grumbled, taking another drink. "She ain't moved, probably asleep. Or knocked out," Cole said, shrugging. "Don't matter. She's Finch's problem now." Cole wrapped himself in a bedroll, his pistol by his hand. Jed sat on a log, his rifle across his lap, and stared into the fire. Silas waited. He waited an hour of pure, cold stillness. The canyon grew dark. The fire burned low. Jed's head began to nod. Silas moved. He did not go down the noisy game trail. He went down the rock face, his fingers and toes finding holds that were not there, moving like a spider, silent as the shadows. He reached the canyon floor 50 yards from the camp. He was barefoot. He had left his moccasins on the ridge. He took his knife. The rifle was for later. This was for silence. Jed was dozing, his chin on his chest, the rifle loose in his lap. Silas moved. He was a shadow. 10 yards, 5. He was behind the log. He could smell the man's unwashed body, the sour whiskey on his breath. He rose up. He clapped his left hand over Jed's mouth and nose, cutting off the air, cutting off the scream. With his right, he drove the long, heavy blade of his hunting knife under the man's jaw, up into the brain. It was instant, a single, convulsive shudder. Silas held him, lowering the body gently, silently, to the ground. He pulled the knife free, wiped it on the man's own shirt, and took the rifle from his lap. "One," he turned. "Cole, the sallow one. He was still in his bedroll." Silas stepped over Jed's body. He crossed the small, sleeping camp. He stood over Cole. "Delilah." He looked at her. Her eyes were open. She was watching him. She had been watching the whole time. Her face was a mask of terror and something else, a fierce, wild hope. He put a finger to his lips. He reached down, his hand moving slow, toward Cole's pistol, and a rock, dislodged by the mule, skittered. A small, tiny sound. Cole's eyes snapped open. He did not see Silas. He saw death. He tried to yell, tried to grab his gun. Silas slammed the butt of Jed's rifle into the man's face. The crack of bone was loud. Cole grunted, dazed, blood pouring from his nose. He was tough. He rolled, kicking his way out of the bedroll, grasping for the pistol. Silas swung the rifle again, but Cole was fast. He grabbed the barrel, deflecting it. He was on his feet, a long, thin knife in his hand. He was a knife fighter. "You old bastard!" he hissed, spitting blood. He lunged, fast as a snake. Silas, expecting a brawler, was caught by surprise. The knife, thin and sharp, sank deep into his left thigh. Silas roared, a sound of pure animal pain and rage. He dropped the rifle and grabbed the man's wrist, but the man twisted, pulling the blade free, and lunged again. This time, Silas was ready. He let the knife come, but he turned, taking the blow on his side, a glancing, ripping cut along his ribs. The pain was searing. He ignored it. He had the man's arm. He had him. This was not a knife fight. This was a contest of strength. And Cole, for all his speed, was a thin, sallow man. Silas was a bear. Silas squeezed the man's wrist. He heard the bone pop. Cole screamed. Silas hit him. He hit him with the force of the mountain, the fury of a man who had his wife stolen. He hit him until the sallow face was a red ruin. He did not stop until the man was a limp, boneless weight in his arms. He let the body drop. He stood, panting, the world a red-black haze. Blood was pouring from his thigh. His side was on fire. "Delilah!" he gasped. He stumbled, falling to one knee. The blood! There was so much blood! Silas! He saw her. She was fighting her ropes, sobbing. He crawled to her. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold his own knife. He sawed at the ropes. They were thick. "Hurry!" she whispered, her voice raw. "Oh God, Silas, you're bleeding!" The ropes parted. She was free. She did not run. She did not check the bodies. She fell on him, her small hands going to the wound in his thigh. It was a black, gushing hole. "It's bad," he managed, his voice thick. He was cold, so cold. "No," she said. It was not a plea. It was a command. "No, you don't get to die." He had lost too much blood. He had run all night. The adrenaline was gone. He collapsed. He fell, his head landing in her lap. He looked up at her. The moon, a thin sliver, was just over her shoulder. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Home," he whispered. "Gotta get you. Home." "We are," she sobbed, her tears falling on his face. "We are. Don't you die on me, old man. Do you hear me? Don't you dare." He tried to smile. His vision was tunneling. She grabbed his face, her hands fierce. "You're mine now," she whispered, her voice a low, feral growl. "You're mine. You said so." His eyes closed. He woke to pain, a hot, searing pain. He was moving. He was on the mule, slumped over. Delilah was walking beside him, her hand on his back, holding him on. She was crying, but she was walking. "Delilah!" "Be quiet," she ordered. "Save your strength. We're almost home." He blacked out. He woke to fire. He was in the cabin. He was in the fur bed. He was naked. Delilah was standing over him, her face streaked with soot and blood. His blood. She was holding a red-hot skinning knife in the flames. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice shaking. "But the bleeding, it won't stop." "No," he gasped. "Yes." She pressed the hot blade to the wound in his thigh. His scream echoed off the mountains. And then, darkness. For days, he was a ghost. He drifted in a world of fever and pain and shadows. He would wake. Sometimes, he would see her, a fierce, exhausted angel, forcing water between his lips. He would feel her, bathing him, her touch no longer tentative, but proprietary. Strong, he heard her, talking to him. "You are not leaving me," she'd say, her voice raw from lack of sleep. I did not survive them to lose you. You will stay. You will heal." She was always moving. She tended the fire. He heard a shot. One day, a rifle shot. He woke. She was there, covered in blood. "Delilah? It's just a rabbit," she said, her hands shaking. She had used Jed's rifle. I got one. For broth." She had never fired a gun in her life. She nursed him. She refused to let him go. She hunted for him. She boiled the water. She cleaned his wounds, which festered, then, slowly, began to heal. She was no longer the runaway. She was the mountain. She was the survivor. Their bond, which had been forged in shared silence and desperate passion, was now sealed in his blood. It was deeper than words. It was a fierce, unspoken thing, a shared knowledge that they belonged to each other. Weeks later, he was sitting up. He was thin, his strength gone, but he was alive. She was sitting on the floor, asleep, her head resting on the edge of the cot, her hand on his arm, as if to make sure he was still there. He looked at her, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the new, hard lines of her mouth. He had saved her life, and she, in turn, had saved his. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that the peace was a lie. The world was still out there. Finch was still out there. And when Finch learned that his two best men were dead, he would not send more men. He would, Silas suspected, come himself. He looked at the woman who had fought a mountain to keep him alive. He would have to be strong again. He would have to be, for her. The spring did not come gently. It came with the sound of 1,000 roaring creeks, a world of ice and snow unlocking itself in a muddy, violent rush. Silas healed. His body, tended by Delilah's fierce, unyielding care, knitted itself back together. The wounds in his thigh and side became new, purple scars, added to the collection that mapped his life. But he was restless. The peace was a lie. He was weaker than he had been, his strength slow to return, and the world was waking up. "I need supplies," he said one morning, his voice a low growl. "Salt, bullets, we're low." Delilah, who was cleaning the rifles, both his and the one she'd taken from Jed, did not look up. "Greystone?" "No, too far, and not yet. There's a trading post south of the pass. I'll be gone 2 days. No more." He was afraid to leave her. She was afraid to let him go. But the mountain was not enough. They could not hide forever. He kissed her, a hard, brief kiss that was more of a promise than a romance. "Bolt the door. Keep the rifle close. Fire it if you need. I'll hear." "I know," she said, her eyes meeting his. They were not the eyes of the girl he had found. They were the eyes of the woman who had held a hot knife to his flesh to save him. He took the mule and moved through the sucking mud of the spring thaw. The trading post was little more than a large soddy, run by a man who asked no questions. It smelled of wet fur, tobacco, and whiskey. It was there, nailed to the wall, that he saw it. The poster was new, the ink still dark. His own name, Silas Boone, and hers, Delilah Grace, wanted for theft, kidnapping, and the murder of 3 men. A reward of $500 was offered by Thomas Grace for the safe return of his bewitched daughter. And beneath it, a second, handwritten note. An additional $500 for the body of Silas Boone, dead or alive, and the return of the woman. Finch, $1,000. It was a fortune. It was enough to bring every lowlife, every gunman with an empty belly, up from the valleys. He was reading it, his face a mask of cold stone, when 2 men shouldered past him. They were not trappers. They were not miners. They wore new pistols, tied low. They smelled of city whiskey and stale cigars. 1,000, one of them said. A thin, rat-like man. "That's enough to buy a man a new life. Gotta find him first," his partner grunted. "They say he's a giant, lives on a rock up there. And the girl, she's as wild as he is now." They looked at Silas. They saw a massive, scarred man in worn buckskins, his hair long, his face newly shaved but hard as granite. He looked back at them, his eyes flat and dead. They looked away first. Silas bought his salt, his bullets, and a small bag of coffee. He said not a word. He rode the mule back up the pass, the poster a burning image in his mind. He found her on the ridge, rifle in hand,
watching the pass. She had seen him coming for a mile. She lowered the rifle, her relief so visible it cut him. That night, in the cabin, he told her. He laid the salt and bullets on the table, and then he laid the news. $1,000, she said, her voice quiet. She was not afraid. She was angry. My father and him, they've made us monsters. They've made us a target, Silas corrected. He sat, the bench groaning under his weight. He looked at his hands. I had a man coming, an old friend, Gus Thorne. He was passing through on his way south, New Mexico territory. I was gonna ask him. Ask him what? To take you, he said, the words torn from him. To get you safe, to Santa Fe. You could start over, change your name. Delilah was silent for a long time. She walked to the fire, staring into the flames. He had offered her an escape. He had offered her the one thing he could not have, freedom. She turned. Her face was set. No, Delilah? No, I am done running. I ran from my father's house. I ran from Absalom Finch. I am not running from this cabin, and I am not, she said, her voice dropping. Running from you. I will not be sent away. Not again. This ain't me sending you, he argued, his voice rough. This is me. This is me trying to keep you alive. They're gunmen, Delilah, not just bounty men, killers. They'll come. They'll keep coming until we are dead, she finished for him. Or until we are not his prey. Silas, he is our problem, and we will finish it. Finish it? How? We kill every man who comes? We can't. No, she said, her eyes bright with a cold. Hard fire. We go to him. We go to the root. We go to Greystone. Silas stared at her as if she were mad. Greystone? That's a death trap. That's his town. The law. The sheriff. He's in Finch's pocket. Then we will pull him out. She said. She walked to him, her hands clenched. What is the one thing he has? The one thing that gives him a right to hunt me? Silas was silent. The contract, she whispered. The paper. The lie that says I am his property. He's a man of business, of law, or the appearance of it. He won't just have me shot in the street. He will have me reclaimed, and that is his weakness. How? I saw him, Silas, the night he won me. He was drunk. He was proud. He'd added a new page to the contract my father signed, a clause. It was vile. It called me livestock. It gave him the right to break me. My father never saw it. But Finch, he signed my father's name to it. He forged it. He was laughing about it. His word against yours. Silas growled. Maybe, she said. But it's a start. It's the only thing we have. I will not hide on this mountain. Silas, waiting for a bullet. I will not. I will not watch you die for me. We will face this together, or not at all. He looked at her. He saw the woman who had held his life in her hands. He saw the steel that had been forged in her own fire. He saw his wife, in all but name. He nodded. Once. Greystone. The journey down from the mountain was a descent into the world. They did not travel as runaways. They traveled as soldiers. He had his rifle. She had Jed's. He had his long knife. She had a pistol, the one from Cole, tucked into the waistband of her skirt. They reached the outskirts of Greystone on a muddy, cold afternoon. The town was loud, a sprawl of raw timber and false-fronted buildings. It smelled of coal smoke, wet horses, and people. As they walked down the main street, a river of mud, the world stopped. A miner, his face black with dust, stopped pushing his barrow. A woman, respectable in a bonnet, pulled her child close. All eyes went to them. They were a sight. Silas Boone, a giant of a man, his face scarred and hard, his newly shaved jaw set. He was limping, the wound in his thigh still stiff, but he moved with a purpose. And the woman beside him, this was not the Delilah Grace who had fled. The fine lady was gone. Her hair was not in curls, but in a single, thick braid down her back. She wore no corset, no petticoats. She wore one of Silas's old wool shirts, tucked into her worn skirt, and a pair of men's boots on her feet, caked in mountain mud. She was pale, and she was thin, but she was not broken. She walked with her head high, proud, and her hand was not on his arm, but near the pistol in her belt. That's him," a whisper from the saloon porch. "Boone, the hermit, and the girl, my God, is that Thomas Grace's daughter? She looks feral." Delilah did not look at them. She looked straight ahead. Silas walked beside her, a walking fortress. His gaze swept the rooftops, the alleys, the windows. "Where?" he rumbled. "The sheriff's office," she said. It's down by the palace." The palace, the very saloon where she had been sold. It was, she realized, where this had to end. The sheriff's office was empty. A sign, nailed to the door, read, "Inquire at the palace." "Of course he is," Delilah said, her voice bitter. "No," Silas said. Not in there. It's a trap." "It's the only way," she said. She looked at him. "Do you trust me?" He looked at her, at the woman who had hunted for him, at the woman who was willing to walk into the lion's den. "Aye," he said. "I trust you." He pushed the batwing doors. The saloon went silent. The piano player, a small man in a vest, fumbled on the keys. A deck of cards, held by a gambler, paused midair. The smoke, thick and blue, hung in the air, unmoving. And there, at the back table, surrounded by cards and whiskey and two new, hard-faced gunmen, sat Absalom Finch. He was in a tailored suit, a diamond pin in his cravat. He looked up. His eyes, those cold reptilian eyes, found hers. He did not look surprised. He looked pleased. He smiled, a slow unfolding of his thin lips. He placed his cards neatly on the table. Well, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "The runaway returns, and she's brought her pet." He stood, brushing a piece of lint from his waistcoat. He moved toward them, his gunmen standing but staying by the table. He was not afraid. This was his room. This was his town. He circled Silas, like a dog inspecting a piece of meat. "My God, man," he said, his voice full of a mock pity. "What a specimen. How old are you? 70, 80? Do you even know? Do they teach you to bathe up on that rock you crawled out from under? I can smell you from here. The stink of bear and failure." Silas stood like a stone. His hand was near his knife. His eyes were on Finch. Delilah put her hand on Silas's arm. "Not now," she whispered, her voice a thread of steel. "Wait." Finch's eyes snapped to her hand. He laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "She gives you orders now, old man. Is that it? She's learned to command the beasts?" He stepped in front of Delilah. He was close enough for her to smell the whiskey and the cologne. It was the smell of her nightmares. "You," he said, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You were my property, girl. You are still my property. You have cost me a great deal of money. Three good men. You will pay for that. You will spend the rest of your life paying for that." He raised his hand, his kid leather glove immaculate. "And you will start," he whispered, "by learning to never... Look, a man..." He struck her, a sharp, cracking sound as the leather met her face. It snapped her head to the side, splitting her lip, the same one he had split before. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Silas did not roar. He did not yell. He moved. He was not the old man. He was not the limping invalid. He was the avalanche. He was the bear. He crossed the 2 feet between them in an instant. His left hand, the size of a dinner plate, clamped onto Absalom Finch's face, the thumb and fingers digging in like talons. He lifted. Finch's feet left the floor. A choked, gurgling sound came from his throat. The 2 gunmen at the back table went for their pistols. "Don't!" Delilah screamed.
She had her own pistol out, the one from Cole, and it was leveled, her hand steady. Not at the gunman, but at Finch's head. "Don't, or I'll kill him!" The gunman froze. Silas held Finch in the air. He looked at the man who had hurt her. And then he threw him. He threw him, not at the wall, but at the poker table. Finch crashed into it, and the table, a heavy oak thing, cracked in two, cards and chips and whiskey exploding into the air. Finch was dazed. He was not a fighter. He was a bully. Silas was on him. He grabbed the front of Finch's tailored suit, hauling him up from the wreckage. Silas's other hand, his right, balled into a fist. He hit him. Once. A sound like a butcher's cleaver hitting meat. He hit him again. Twice. The sound of cartilage breaking. Finch's handsome face was a ruin. Blood poured from his nose. His mouth. Silas pulled him up one last time, his hand moving to the man's throat, his thumb finding the soft spot. He was going to end this. He was going to crush the snake's head. "Silas, no!" Delilah's voice. "Stop! This is not the way! Don't become him! Let the law see him! Let them see!" A large man, his belly hanging over his gun belt, was pushing his way through the crowd. His own pistol drawn. It was the sheriff, Sheriff Brody. "What in God's name is going on here?" Brody yelled. "Boone, you let him go! You let him go! Now! Or I'll put a bullet in you!" Silas, his chest heaving, his hands slick with Finch's blood, looked at Delilah. He saw her, her face bruised, her lip bleeding. But her eyes, they were not telling him to stop. They were telling him to win. He let Finch drop. The railroad man fell to the floor, a gasping, bloody heap. He assaulted us," Silas growled, his voice a ragged thunder. He struck Delilah. He's a liar," Finch spat, blood and a broken tooth falling from his mouth. She's my property. I have the contract. He's the liar." Delilah stepped forward, her pistol still in her hand, but it was lowered. Her voice, clear and strong, cut through the entire saloon. "He struck me, Sheriff, just as he struck me before I ran, just as he paid men, Quill and Jed and Cole, to hunt me, to beat me, and to kill the man who saved me." She held up a stained, folded piece of paper, the one she had taken from the dead man. Cole, the one that had been taken from her. "He says I'm his property because of this. The contract, the one my father signed. It's legal." Finch choked from the floor. "She's mine. The law says so. Sheriff." "The law," Delilah's voice rang out, "says a contract is void if signed under duress. The law says a contract is void if it is forged." She unfolded the paper. "My father signed the first page to cover his gambling debt. But this second page, this livestock clause that states I am his property, to be beaten, or broken, or sold, this is not my father's signature. She's mad. Am I?" Delilah's eyes swept the room. "I saw him, with my own eyes. He was drunk, bragging. He wrote this, and he signed my father's name. I saw him. Lies," Finch sputtered. A whore's lies. Who in this room would believe you?" "I would." The voice came from the shadows. From the stairs, a woman in a red satin dress, her face painted, her hair a bright, brassy gold. It was Sadie, one of the saloon girls. Sadie walked down the stairs, her chin high. She looked at Finch with open contempt. Then she looked at Delilah, and her eyes softened. "I remember you," Sadie said, her voice rough. "You were in his room. At the hotel, the night you ran, I brought whiskey." She turned to the sheriff. He had her in there. She was crying. I heard her, and when I went in, he was at the desk. He had a piece of paper, and he was practicing, signing Thomas Grace, over and over. He laughed. He told me practice makes perfect." The saloon was dead silent. Every eye was on Finch, his bloody face, his ruined suit. His mask was gone. Sheriff Brody looked at Finch. He looked at the mountain of a man at Delilah's side, who was still trembling with the need to kill. He looked at Sadie. He knew Finch was a railroad man, a man with money and power.
But he also saw a room full of miners and trappers and townsfolk who had just witnessed all of it. He saw forgery. He saw assault. And he wanted this to be over. "A contract," the sheriff said, his voice loud, "based on a forgery. And for an unlawful act, it ain't worth the paper it's on." He walked to Delilah. He looked at the paper in her hand. He took it. He pulled a match from his vest pocket, struck it on his boot, and lit the contract on fire. He dropped the burning, curling paper into a brass cuspidor. They all watched it burn to a black, greasy ash. "It's done," the sheriff said. "The contract is void. She ain't your property. She ain't anything to you." He turned to Finch. "Mr. Finch, I suggest you see a doctor. And then I suggest you get on the 5 o'clock train, the one heading east. Your business in Greystone, it's concluded." He then looked at Silas and at Delilah. "As for you two, go home. Just go home." Silas put his bloody hand out. Delilah took it, her small, steady hand grasping his. They turned. They walked, past the bar, past the silent drinkers. As they reached the door, Silas looked back. Absalom Finch was still on the floor. He was being helped up by his 2 gunmen, and he was looking at them. His face was a bloody ruin, but his eyes were not the eyes of a defeated man. They were the eyes of a snake, cold and full of venom, promising one last, fatal bite. But Silas turned his back on him. He and Delilah pushed through the batwing doors and stepped out into the cold, clean air. They walked out of Greystone without looking back. The muddy street, the whispers, the staring faces. All of it fell away with each step they took up the pass. The air grew thinner, cleaner, colder. It was the air of home. They said very little on the journey. Silas was quiet, his limp more pronounced after the violence in the saloon. He had not healed, not fully, and the fight had cost him. Delilah walked beside him, carrying Jed's rifle as if she had been born to it. The bruise on her cheek was a dark, angry flower, but her eyes were clear. The law had set her free. The burning of the contract was a legal fact. But as they climbed, Silas kept looking back. He would stop, ostensibly to rest his leg, and his gaze would sweep the valley below. He was searching. "He won't come," Delilah said, knowing his thoughts. "The sheriff, he ran him out of town. He's a coward. Silas, a bully who pays others to fight." "He ain't a coward," Silas said, his voice a low, tired rumble. "He's a snake. And a snake, when you corner it, it don't run, it just waits. He'll be back on the train, like the sheriff said. But trains, they run west, too." "Then we'll be ready," she said, her hand resting on the rifle stock. When they reached the cabin, it was as they had left it, a dark, silent hole in the mountain. The door still broken and hanging from one hinge, but it was home. For a week, a fragile peace settled over them. Silas, with a grim, focused energy, repaired the door, making it stronger than before, reinforcing it with a new, heavy bar. Delilah cleaned, scrubbing the ash and mud from the floor, reclaiming the space from the memory of the intruders. They fell back into their rhythm, hunting, trapping, boiling water. But the softness was gone. The quiet, easy intimacy they had begun to build was now overlaid with a new, sharp tension. They were no longer just survivors. They were soldiers. Silas spent 2 days teaching her, really teaching her, how to use his rifle. Not the lighter repeating rifle she'd taken, but his own, the heavy .50 caliber Sharps, a buffalo gun. It was too big for her, too heavy, and the kick was brutal. "You don't aim," he'd instructed, his hands on her shoulders, showing her how to brace. "You breathe, you become the gun. You let the world go quiet, and you squeeze. You don't pull, you squeeze. So the shot, it surprises you." She fired. The blast was deafening, and the rifle butt slammed into her shoulder, sending her stumbling back.
"I missed the tree," she said, rubbing the new bruise.
"But you hit the mountain," he said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. "It'll do." The peace lasted for 8 days. On the 9th day, Silas was at the edge of his property, a mile from the cabin, resetting a trap line that had been disturbed by the thaw. The air was cold, the sky a flat, heavy gray that promised more snow. One last, bitter gift from winter. He heard the snap of a twig. It was not a deer, it was not a marten. He froze, his hand on the knife at his belt. He turned, slowly. Absalom Finch stood 20 yards away. He was a nightmare. He was not the tailored, manicured man from the saloon. His face, what Silas had left of it, was a ruined, pulpy mess of purple and yellow. His nose was bandaged, but the dressing was soaked in blood. He was wearing the same fine suit, now torn and caked in mud. He must have ridden all night. He was alone, and he was shaking, his body vibrating with a rage that went beyond madness. In his hand, he held a small, pearl-handled revolver, a gambler's gun.
"You—"
Finch hissed. The sound was wet, his broken mouth struggling with the word.
"You animal! You filth!"
"Finch," Silas said, his voice flat. He began to raise his hands, slowly. "It's over. The contract. It's burned. The law."
"Law?"
Finch laughed, a terrible, gurgling sound.
"I am the law. I was power, and you took my face."
He touched his ruined cheek and whimpered. "You took her, my property."
"She ain't property,"
Silas said, his eyes on the pistol. It was small, but deadly.
"She's a woman. Go home. Finch, go east, before you get yourself killed."
"Killed?" Finch screamed, the word cracking.
"I am already dead. You killed me in that saloon. You let them laugh at me."
He was unhinged. He was here not for Delilah. He was here for his pride. He was here to kill the man who had shown him to be weak.
She's up there, isn't she?"
Finch's eyes darted toward the cabin, unseen.
Waiting for her beast. I came to kill you. And then I will take her. I will drag her. I will skin her, like you taught her."
"Go home, Absalom," Silas said, taking one slow step.
"No!"
Finch screamed, and he raised the pearl-handled revolver.
You go to hell!"
He fired. Silas was not fast. He was old, and his leg was stiff. He did not dodge. He turned, a half-second too late, a half-thought of protecting the path to the cabin. The bullet, small but hot, struck him high in the chest. It felt not like a shot. It felt like a mule kick, a great stunning blow that took the air from his lungs. He looked down. There was a small, dark hole in his buckskin shirt. It didn't even look real. He looked up at Finch. He tried to take a step. His legs, the great, strong legs that had held him on this mountain, would not obey. He fell. He landed on his knees, a strange, gurgling sound in his own throat.
"Silas!" The scream was not in his head. It was real. He looked... Delilah. She was running from the trees, her face a mask of white terror. She was carrying his rifle, the heavy one. Finch turned, his ruined face breaking into a grotesque, triumphant smile. "Ah, the bitch comes to see the dog die."
He raised the revolver, his hand shaking, to aim at her. Silas saw it. He was dying. He was bleeding, but he saw it.
"Delilah!"
he gasped, a pink froth on his lips.
"Breathe. Squeeze."
She did not hesitate. She did not falter. She was not the city girl. She was not the victim. She was his woman. She stopped. She was 50 yards from Finch. She braced. planting her feet in the mud. Just as he had taught her, she raised the massive rifle. The world went quiet. She saw the man who had beaten her, the man who had sold her, the man who had just shot her. Her life. She squeezed. The blast of the sharps was not a crack. It was a boom, a cannonade that echoed off every peak, a sound of final, absolute judgment. Absalom Finch did not make a sound. The heavy .50 caliber bullet, a round designed to stop a charging buffalo, struck him in the center of his chest. He didn't just fall. He exploded. He was there, a man in a suit. And then he was gone, a red mist in the gray air. Delilah did not look at what she had done. The rifle, a dead, heavy weight, fell from her hands. She ran to Silas. He was on his side, curled, holding his chest. The blood. It was not a trickle. It was a tide. It was a dark, pulsing spring, soaking the snow, melting it. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." She fell to her knees in the bloody mud, her hands hovering, not knowing where to touch. "Silas," he looked at her. His eyes, they were fading. "Delilah," he choked. You shot." "I know," she sobbed, grabbing his hand. I'm here. Good girl," he whispered. His eyes rolled back. He went limp. "No, Silas, don't you leave me, Silas." He was not breathing. The first cold flake of snow landed on her cheek. She looked up. The sky, which had been gray, was now a low, churning ceiling. The storm, the last storm of winter. It was here. He was a mile from the cabin. He was too heavy. She could never. "The sled," she whispered. "The sled he used to haul wood. It was by the wood pile. Half a mile." She stood. She looked at the man she had just killed, a thing of rags and ruin. She looked at the man she had just saved, and who was now dying. She ran, her lungs on fire, her feet slipping in the mud. She ran to the wood pile. The sled was there. She grabbed it, the rope cutting into her hand, and she ran back. He was as she had left him, a still, dark mound in the snow. Was he dead? She did not have time. She could not think it. She rolled him, a terrible, dead weight, onto the crude wooden sled. It was a miracle. She did it. She did not know how. She began to pull. It was a mile. It was 1,000 miles. It was uphill. The snow was falling faster now. Thick, wet, heavy. It was not powder. It was cement. The sled runners, meant for ice, sank into the mud. Delilah pulled. She wrapped the rope around her waist, bent double, and pulled. Her muscles screamed. Her back tore. She slipped, falling to her hands and knees. She crawled, dragging him. "I will not let you go," she chanted, the words a hoarse gasp. She pulled. For an hour. For an eternity. The cabin, it was there. She dragged him over the threshold. The sled, it would not fit. She cut the rope. She got on the floor and she dragged him, by his arms, by his shoulders. She pulled him, a wet, bloody trail, to the hearth, to the furs. She collapsed, panting. For 1 second, then the work began. The storm hit, the wind howled, a living, screaming thing. But it was outside. She was inside. He was still, his chest, the bullet, it was in him. She had no whiskey, no laudanum. She had a knife, her skinning knife, and the fire. She did what he had taught her. She was clean. She boiled the knife. She boiled rags. She looked at his face. He was so pale. She realized, already gone. "No," she said, her voice a low command. She cut into his flesh, into the meat of his chest. He did not stir. She dug, her fingers, small and now so strong. She felt it,
The piece of lead, it was near his collarbone. It had missed his heart. It had missed. She pulled it out. A small, deformed piece of metal, and the bleeding. The bleeding started anew. A fresh, terrible gush. The hot knife, the one she had used on his leg. She heated it in the fire until it glowed white. She closed her eyes. She smelled the searing flesh. He did not move, but the bleeding slowed. It stopped. She bandaged him. She wrapped him in every fur, every blanket. And for days, she fought. The storm raged. He did not wake. He burned. The fever took him. He was back in the mine. He was crying. For Mary. For Timothy. Delilah sat, her body an engine, her will a thing of iron. She fed the fire. She melted snow for water. She forced drops of it between his cracked, black lips. She bathed his face. On the third day, the firewood ran out. The woodpile was buried in 6 feet of snow. She could not. The cabin grew cold. The fire, his life, was dying. She looked around. The table, the bench, the cot. She took his axe. She began to chop. She hacked at the cot he had given her, the wood splintering. She fed his furniture to the fire. It was not enough. He was growing cold. His breath was a shallow, icy rattle. The bed they shared, the great pine frame he had built with his own hands. She wept. Then, a single, dry sob. You will not take him, she whispered to the storm, to God, to the empty room. She took the axe, and she chopped. She burned their bedposts, one by one, to keep him alive. She fed the fire his past. She fed it their future. She burned it all, just to keep his heart beating. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The fire was dead. The cabin was a wreck, a graveyard of their furniture. She had hunted. She had taken Jed's rifle, her fingers frozen, and she had shot a rabbit. She had made a broth. He was still, his skin was cool. The fever had broken. He was not breathing. She put her head on his chest, her ear to the ruined, scarred flesh. Nothing. No, she whispered. No, after all this, no. She listened, and a flutter, a beat, as faint as a moth's wing. Thump, and then another thump. She wept. She laid her head on his chest and she wept, the tears washing the soot from his skin. He woke, days later. He woke to the smell of potato soup. He opened his eyes. The world was wrong. The cabin, it was empty. The light was coming from the roof. Delilah. She was sitting on the floor, by the fire, whittling. She was so thin. She looked like a shadow. Delilah. His voice. It was a rasp. A stranger's voice. Her head snapped up. The knife fell. Her eyes. Silas. She breathed. She did not run. She crawled. She crawled to him, her hands shaking, and she just touched his face, his beard, which had grown back, ragged and gray. You're warm, she whispered. He tried to sit up. The pain, it was a white, blinding fire. He fell back. The storm, he gasped. It's over, she said, her voice breaking. It's been 10 days. The storm is over. He looked at her. He saw the dark circles under her eyes. He saw the new raw lines of her face. He saw the empty room. He saw the axe by the hearth. He saw the splintered, sawn-off nubs of the bed, he whispered. I needed firewood, she said, the tears finally coming. A flood. You were so cold. I burned it. I burned everything. He looked at this woman, who had waged a war for him, who had killed for him, who had burned their world to keep him in it. He He wept. He, who had not wept for his son, who had not wept for his wife. He laid his head back, and a great, racking sob tore from his chest. He wept for the shame of it, for the waste. I'm too old, he whispered, the tears rolling into his beard, into the scars. I'm too old to deserve this, to deserve you. She stopped crying. Her face, tear-streaked and exhausted, hardened. She leaned over him, her hair falling around his face, a dark, wild curtain. She put her mouth on his, not a soft kiss, but a fierce, biting claim. She pulled back, her eyes, clear and gray as the mountain sky, locked on his. Then stay alive, she commanded, her voice a raw, iron whisper, and grow old with me properly. Spring arrived. It came, finally. The snow receded, a slow, grudging retreat, leaving behind a world of thick, black mud and the bright, shocking green of new life. The aspen buds were tight, hard fists. The creek was a roar. Silas was sitting on a stool, the one piece of furniture she had saved. He was in the doorway of the cabin, the sun on his face. He was thin. He was scarred. He would never be the man he was. But he was alive. He was watching her. Delilah was in the small patch of ground they had cleared for a garden. She was barefoot, the mud, rich and dark, squeezed between her toes. She was wearing one of his old, patched wool shirts. It was too big for her. The sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She was using a sharpened stick to dig holes. She was planting potatoes. She would drop a piece of seed potato into the hole, and then she would cover it, tamping the earth down with her bare, muddy foot. She was humming, a small, tuneless, happy sound. Silas watched her, his eyes aching. He watched the line of her back. He watched the way the sun caught the auburn in her hair. He watched her, his wife, planting their future in the thawed soil. He waited until she had finished the row. She stood up, wiping her brow with a muddy forearm, leaving a streak of dirt on her face. She smiled at him, a real, true smile. He spoke, his voice quiet, still rough from its long disuse. You still want me to act like I'm yours? Delilah turned. She looked at him, her smile softening, her eyes full of the sun and the mud and the spring. She said, I want you to never stop. Thank you for listening to this story. Where in the world are you tuning in from? Let me know, in English, in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this one, and share your thoughts on Silas and Delilah's journey.